right, my friends, it is time to learn about another person who fought for a cause. We've already talked about Eleanor Roosevelt, who was her husband's eyes and ears, and helped speak up about human rights. We talked about Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in Major League sports. We talked about Mary McLeod Bethune, who started a school for African American girls and also taught African American men so that they could vote. And about Susan B. Anthony, who fought to end slavery and for women's suffrage. Today we are going to learn about another amazing and incredible woman, this one named Rosa Parks. We will learn about something that happened one day when Rosa Parks was riding the bus that became a very important event in American history. First, of course, we'll go over our vocabulary words.
Segregation. Segregation is the practice of keeping groups of people separate or apart because of things such as race. Because of segregation, Jackie Robinson was not able to eat at the same restaurants as his teammates when they traveled to play baseball. Boycott. A boycott happens when people join together as a group and refuse to do business with a particular company or business as a way of showing strong disapproval. Today we will learn about the Montgomery bus boycott, which was one of the many boycotts to end segregation. Injustice. Injustice is a lack of fairness. The punishment John received was considered to be a terrible injustice, as many people believed he was innocent of the crime. Disrupted. Disrupted means prevented something from happening by causing confusion and turmoil. The protesters' chants disrupted the president's speech, and people struggled to hear him. Assign. To assign means to give or to set apart something. The airline was not able to assign our seats until the day of the flight. Rosa Louise Parks was born a long time ago in 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama. Her family name was Macaulay. Rosa and her family were African American. Rosa grew up on a small farm with her brother, her mother, and her grandparents. Rosa was a happy child. She loved her family. However, Rosa lived at a time and in a place where African Americans faced discrimination. This was especially true in the South, where Rosa lived, because in that part of the United States, there was segregation. Because of segregation, African Americans and white people did not go to the same schools, eat at the same restaurants, or go to the same movie theaters. When traveling by bus, African Americans were expected to sit in certain seats. It was as if African Americans and white people lived in different worlds. When Rosa was a little girl, she attended a school that was just for African American children. It was an old one-room schoolhouse that only held classes for 5 months of each year. Far too often, there weren't enough desks or school supplies for the students. Rosa noticed that buses took white children to the new school near where she lived. When Rosa was 11 years old, she was sent to Montgomery, Alabama, to continue her studies. But when she was 16, Rosa had to leave school to care for her grandmother and her mother, who had both become ill. To help support the family, Rosa worked in a shirt factory. When Rosa was 19, she married Raymond Parks. Raymond was a barber. He was also actively involved in the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. Here, the word chapter means a group in a certain area that makes up one small section of a larger group. This image shows another chapter of NAACP from another state. This organization wanted to make life in the United States fairer and safer for all African Americans and end segregation in the South. Rosa also became involved and served as the Montgomery chapter secretary. In addition, she returned to high school to earn her high school diploma. Then came the day in Rosa's life when she stood up for what was right. Actually, Rosa did not stand up, and that's the reason why we remember and honor her to this date. The evening of December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, was cold. The streets were full of people shopping or making their way home from work. By this time, Rosa had a job as a seamstress at a local department store. Her day had just ended, and she had rushed to catch the city bus that would take her home. As Rosa boarded the bus, she could see that it was already quite full. Because the section at the back of the bus, where African Americans usually sat, was so full, Rosa found a seat near the middle of the bus. The seat that Rosa had found was just behind the seats reserved for white people. Before long, all the seats on the bus were full, and several white people were left standing. Back then, the bus driver had the authority or power to move people, and African Americans were the first to be moved. The bus driver noticed the people standing and ordered several African American people on the bus to give up their seats. All of them did as he asked, except for Rosa. When the bus driver told Rosa that if she did not stand up, he would call the police to come and arrest her, she quietly responded, "You may do that." When he asked her one more time to stand up, Rosa responded by saying, "I don't think I should have to stand up." The bus driver made the call, and before long, a police officer arrived. The officer wanted to know why she would not give up her seat. Rosa responded by asking the officer a question. "Why are you always pushing us around?" she asked. Rosa was arrested and taken to the police headquarters. Later that night, she was released on bail. Bail is the money someone pays when he or she has been arrested so that he or she can stay out of jail until the trial or hearing. Law at that time in Alabama gave bus drivers the right to assign seats, and it also gave them the right to carry guns. As a result, many African American people felt threatened and were frightened to challenge this practice. Rosa had done so. Rosa later said she had not planned to protest, but in that moment, her desire for civil rights and her sense of injustice drove her to make that decision. "When I made that decision," Rosa said, "I knew that I had the strength of my ancestors with me." That was the moment that changed history. Rosa had refused to move, and now others would show their support for her. It was decided that the hundreds of African Americans who rode the city buses to work would walk instead. This kind of action is called a boycott. Remember, a boycott is when a group of people join together and refuse to do business with a company or organization. In Montgomery, people refused to ride the city buses. The NAACP began to organize what became known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. African American women's groups began to organize too. A young man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the boycott. Dr. King said, "We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Beginning on December 5th, 1955, people refused to ride the city buses in Montgomery. The boycott lasted for 382 days. 1 year has 365 days in it, so if the boycott lasted 382 days, it was longer than a year. Without passengers to ride the buses couldn't afford to continue running. At that time in Montgomery, more than 7 out of every 10 riders on buses were African American. Businesses were disrupted, and many white people supported the boycott as well. On November 13, 1956, the United States Supreme Court decided that Montgomery's segregated bus seating was unconstitutional. That meant that it was against the law and against the Constitution. A court order was served on December 20th, 1956, and the boycott ended the next day. After that, buses were integrated and African American people could sit wherever they wanted. That boycott became a powerful way for people to peacefully protest. Rosa Parks' actions helped to start the civil rights movement. In fact, Rosa became known as the mother of the civil rights movement. Rosa remained an active member of the NAACP and other civil rights groups. She showed her support for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by participating in civil rights marches. Remind me, friends, what is the civil rights movement? It was a series of events that were fighting against segregation and unfairness towards African Americans during this time in American history. Rosa became a member of the staff of a Michigan congressman. The state of Michigan is highlighted in blue in this image, and Alabama, where Rosa rode the bus, is highlighted in green. She worked in his office for 23 years, from 1965 until she retired in 1988. Rosa also founded an institution to help young people complete their education. In her lifetime, Rosa received several awards for her courage and her work. In 1979, the NAACP awarded Rosa its Springer Medal. Rosa also received 2 of the U.S. government's most important civilian honors, or those honors given to people who aren't serving in our military. Rosa received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1996 and the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in 1999. Rosa once said, "I'd see the bus pass every day, but to me that was a way of life. We had no choice but to accept what was the custom. The bus was among the first ways I realized there was a black world and a white world." Incredibly, by her own actions, Rosa Parks changed that world. Rosa became a symbol of the power of nonviolence. Her quiet, courageous act changed America and changed the course of history. In our story today, we heard the following sentence. Raymond was also actively involved in the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We talked about how chapter in this sentence means a group of people that are part of a larger group in a specific area. Chapter can mean other things, such as one of the main sections of a book, like we see in our second picture.
All right, my friends, as always, I have got some questions about what we learned about today. Today we talked about Rosa Parks and how she refused to give up her seat on a bus ride. Why did she refuse to give up her seat? You've got it. The cause that she was fighting for was to end segregation, and she knew that segregation laws were unfair and that they were not right. What are some examples of discrimination that Rosa Parks faced? There are a lot of things we could say in response to that question. She faced segregation on buses, at schools, restaurants. It all boils down to segregation and how she was not given the same rights as white people in America. What did many people do to support Rosa Parks in her fight to not give up her seat? You've got it. They decided to boycott the Montgomery City buses. To boycott means to refuse to use them. Now remember, the buses counted on people paying to use them in order to run, so it wasn't good for them if people chose not to ride on them. How are Rosa's actions connected to the civil rights movement? Her refusing to give up her seat was a way of her protesting discrimination and segregation. What is the civil rights movement? You've got it again. The civil rights movement was a series of events where people were fighting for the for equal rights for everyone. Who was it that organized the Montgomery bus boycott? It was a man named Martin Luther King Jr., and we'll talk about him a little bit later. Was the boycott successful? Yes. How do you know it was successful? Eventually, segregation on buses was outlawed. How did Rosa Parks continue helping others after the Montgomery bus boycott? What kind of things did she do to continue to help others? She was truly a remarkable lady. There were many things that she did. She continued to support Martin Luther King Jr. and speak out against segregation and discrimination. She worked in a congressman's office, and she helped young people complete their education. How is the United States today different than the United States of Rosa Parks' early life? Turn and talk about that one with your neighbor for a moment. Miss Rosa Parks started the Montgomery bus boycott and refused to give up her seat after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. So we're going to put her after Jackie Robinson on our timeline. Alright, my friends, we are going to write a free verse poem about Miss Rosa Parks now. I'm going to jump on my computer to help give you a better idea of what that should look like. Go ahead and open up the PDF that is attached to this assignment.
All right, I have already got my page flipped, so we can create a bubble map to help us plan our free verse poem about Miss Rosa Parks today. The first thing we'll want to do is put her name right in the middle, since she is who our poem will be about. We talked about a name that Rosa Parks earned when she refused to give up her seat. After that moment, that's the moment that helped start the civil rights movement and keep it going. So she earned the nickname, the mother of the civil rights movement. The movement continued to go on for years, and there were many great people that became a part of that movement and fought for justice for African Americans. Rosa Parks was known as the mother of the civil rights movement because why? What did she do? She refused to give up her seat to a white man. She refused the bus driver's orders to give up her seat so that a white man could sit there. Scroll up a little bit. There we go. What kinds of words would you use to describe Rosa Parks? Oh, before we start talking about words to describe her, what happened when she refused to give up her seat? She was arrested. And after her arrest, people started protesting the Montgomery City. What happened? By boycotting the Montgomery City bus systems. There we go. Remember, to boycott means to refuse to use a business or service as a sign of disapproval. So the Montgomery City, we'll say bus. This started the Montgomery bus boycott, which hurt the bus system's business because many of their customers that they relied on for pay were no longer riding the bus. All right, my friends, now let's think of some words we could use to describe Rosa Parks. What do you think? What kind of person was Rosa Parks? I think she was probably a very brave or courageous person. Remember, the bus driver warned her he was going to call the police, and she told him that he could go ahead and do that, but she still refused to give up her seat. She later worked for a congressman and continued to be a part of the civil rights movement and continued to fight for civil rights for all people. Later in life, she received special honors for her work. We talked about a couple of different medals that she had earned. The Springer Medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Congressional Gold Honor Medal. All right, my friends, your job now is to fill in those last three bubbles with details or facts about Rosa Parks, her accomplishments, and the kind of person that she was. When you have got your plan, we'll use that plan to create a free verse poem. Your poem might not use every single bubble that you created, and that's okay. You don't have to use every single bubble for each poem. Remember, a free verse poem is called a free verse because there are no special rules that you have to follow when writing it. Your words do not have to rhyme, and there is not a specific amount of words or syllables for each line. Your sentences also do not have to be complete sentences. We can use fragments, words, or just phrases to help state our opinion about Rosa Parks and the type of person that she was. Again, that poem will be written on the second page. We'll flip Miss Rosa Parks back right side up. You'll write your title on that first line. Her name would be a good title for this one. And use the ideas you had in your bubble map to write a poem about Rosa Parks. When you have finished your poem, go ahead and turn this one in, and I will see you at our next lesson.